Okay, sorry I can't be here today to explain this to you, but we're going to be working with pedigrees. Pedigrees are just, if you remember from 10th grade, basically a family map or like a family tree where we trace certain traits or disorders through a family. And just some basics. So starting out still in our PowerPoint here, the pedigrees, squares are male, circles are female. So we've got a male, female, male, 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 female. You get it. Empty boxes are not showing the trait, and the filled boxes are. So when we look at an open or filled box or circle, it does not tell us anything except if they're showing the trait. So it's phenotype. PH, pheno, PH, physical appearance. So what they're physically showing. And then you can predict the genotype after that. That's our goal. That's where we're going with this, is to make predictions. So when we look at this one, this male offspring is showing whatever trait this is. This female is showing the trait. This female is showing the trait. And then how we would label them, because sometimes you might have some questions that say, look at individual, and then they'll show you like Roman numeral 2, individual 2, kind of like this. Let me see if I can use my board here. So if I said, look at individual 1, 2, like that, then we would look at Roman numeral 1 and the second individual in that row. So that would be this person right here. Let's try it again. Let's say I wanted to say, is individual, is this person affected? So we go down to row 3, find that the second individual is unaffected. Okay? Does that make sense? Just so that you know how they identify the different people in a pedigree. All right. From here, let's start flipping to the back. We're going to start looking at some actual examples and how to figure out the probabilities or maybe making predictions about different individuals' genotypes, so their actual alleles. So I'm going to pause and pull up the work. Okay, so now turn to this, that kind of flip to the back where I've got some worksheet examples in the back, and look at this first one, simple pedigree. And we're going to start out with simple ones that aren't sex-linked. These are just regular. They're either dominant or they're recessive. We call these autosomal. It looks like this. And we're going to talk, I'll show you in a minute here, but that's just what I mean, autosomal. Okay, so when we look at this, right off the bat, even if this didn't tell me that this was a recessive disorder, it tells us albinism is a recessive disorder. So in order to show the trait, you have to inherit 2 recessive alleles. We can already tell that this is a recessive allele just by looking at this pedigree in one quick glance. Because if this were a dominant trait, in order for any of the children to show the trait, one of the parents, at least, would have to have a dominant allele. Because remember, if it's dominant, it shows up. So they had to have gotten this dominant allele from someone. And it doesn't look like mom or dad, so it can't be dominant. So whenever you see parents that have unaffected parents that have affected children, you're dealing with recessive. And then you can always figure that out by doing Punnett squares or problem solving. So here's how we problem solve. You kind of work your way backwards through pedigrees. So we're going to start with what we do know. We do know that, let me grab a marker here so I can write. All right, so we're going to write in, we know that this one right here, if this is a recessive disorder, we're going to use A, that this individual has 2 recessive alleles, right? Homozygous recessive. This one would have to be homozygous recessive. That's the only way that those individuals can show that trait when it's a recessive trait. Okay? Now, I also know that these two parents, if they aren't showing the trait, they have to have at least one dominant allele. So far, I haven't problem solved to figure out what that second allele is, but we'll figure that out. And actually, I mean, you could go through and you could put a capital A on any of these that aren't showing, just the first A. We don't know about the second one, but if they aren't showing it, we know they have at least one dominant allele, right? Okay, so I'm not going to go all the way through all of these. I'm going to stop right there. Now let's pay attention to mom and dad. Let's think about this. If you have children that have two recessive alleles, remember, we get one allele from mom, one allele from dad, right? To get our allelic combination. Each of these has two recessive alleles. They had to get one from mom, one from dad. So we just learned that mom and dad both have to be carriers. Again, in order for these individuals to have two recessive alleles, they had to inherit one recessive allele from mom, one recessive allele from dad. That's the only way that can happen. So now we know that mom and dad both have a recessive allele. After that, these guys down here, we don't know. This second allele could have been a dominant or recessive. This one could be dominant or recessive.
Alexis Swick and Paige Manette, please report to the office. Lexi Swick and Paige Manette to the office, please.
Did you hear that, Paige? That was yesterday. All right. Over here, what we've got here is this person is marrying into the family. Generally, we assume when they marry in that they're totally normal, they're not even carriers. In this case, it doesn't really matter because the children are unaffected. We know that they had one dominant allele to not show the trait. Now, when you've got a parent that's affected with two recessive alleles and another parent that is unaffected, the unaffected parent, this mom, is the only one who could give her children that dominant allele. So the only thing that dad has to give is a recessive allele. So we know that these two children are heterozygous. That's the only way that could work. And you work your way through this, always understanding you get one allele from mom, one allele from dad. Okay, let's take a look at this last part over here. Again, we haven't solved whether or not this individual has a dominant or recessive allele in that second spot, but knowing that you've got one affected parent and an affected offspring, once again, I can say, okay, this offspring here had to have gotten one recessive allele from mom, one recessive allele from dad. So we just figured out that this has to be a recessive allele in order for that individual to end up with two recessive alleles. When we look at these two right here, again, we can predict that they have a dominant allele because they aren't showing the trait. But also, when we look up here at our choices, again, it's kind of like this part of the pedigree over here. We look and the only dominant allele to be given away in this set of parents is that one right there. So this dominant allele was given to both those offspring. That leaves this parent is the only other donator of that other allele. So the only possible genotype for these two is also heterozygous. They had to have inherited a recessive allele from this parent if they inherited the dominant allele from that parent. Okay, so I'm going to let you stew on that for a minute. See if, well, I'll be back.